All right, CLI.
Yeah, let's do it. All right. So I have a command. So this is a Windows command line, but you can also run it on Windows and Linux and Mac. Kind of explain that in a second. But so I've just navigated to the. Well, actually, I'll show you. I downloaded the MetaMorpheus command line.zip. I extracted that to this folder, and I've navigated to the folder in the command line interface. So all you have to do is just run the cmd.exe program. It'll spit out that you didn't use any flags. Use the help flag to show what all the other flags are. So the most important one, or three most important ones, are the TOML flag, the database flag, and the spectrophile flag. You can also optionally specify an output folder, and then you can also generate the default TOMLs if you want, so you can edit those. Generally speaking, but yeah, I already talked about, you should probably use the GUI to generate those, but you can generate them via command line if you want. And then there's some other settings, which I'll talk about in a second. So I'm going to run, and it gives you an example of how to run just like a basic, very basic command. So I'll use that structure here. Just copy this directory. So I'm going to use a yeast database, even though these data files are mixed yeast and human, because it's just faster that way. But you can run multiple databases too. So I'll run cmd exe, and then the TOML flag. I'll put, I'll use the same TOML that we ran earlier. Then space and spectra. I'll use multiple spectra to show you how that works. And the reason I'm using quotes is because if the path name contains spaces, like task space settings, then Windows and Linux, et cetera, won't be able to interpret that correctly. So the quotes help it give it a literal path to follow. So the space, you can use spaces if you want in there. Okay. So then all you have to do for using multiple spectra files, so you put -s space spectra file and then just space again, and then put the next spectra file path. I believe you can also specify a folder, yeah, or folders containing spectra. And that's just because if you have like hundreds of files, it gets pretty long. So you can just specify a directory if you want. So I could just specify the LFQ example directory, and that would be okay. So then I've got the TOML, I've got the spectra, and then I just need a database. So I'll specify my yeast database. The FASTA, I didn't get an XML. And then this will produce a lot of output. You can change the verbosity with the -v flag. I'll run that again in a second. But you can just see that it runs properly. Oh, it'll ask you to confirm that you accept Thermo's license if you're running a thermo.raw file. So you just put yes. It'll save that for the future. You don't have to keep accepting it. And then it's doing the search. And I'm on a laptop, so it's a little bit slow. I might cancel it partway through to show you the other stuff.
Right, and so, I mean, you know, you always got to think like, who's the audience? But if I, for some reason, was, I think about, you know, Jetstream, because they have Linux VMs for free, right? Or free, sorry, subsidized is the word they want you to use. But let's say I wanted to use somebody else's resources, you know, to run 100 files this is the way I would use MetaMorpheus in a Linux environment, right? Just to like
Close.
crank through stuff.
It's close. I'll show you a couple of options for Linux in a second.
Okay.
So you can see it's doing the search. I'm just going to cancel it. Show you some other stuff. So this is the command I ran last time. So for Linux and Mac, running a Windows.exe will not work. So what you have to do instead is run .NET. That's the command that runs. It's a Microsoft command. It's a Microsoft.NET command, and then you specify MetaMorpheus as an argument. So here it's cmd.dll, not exe. And so if you look here in the file structure file directory, there's a cmd.dll. That's just .NET Core compatible DLL that if you pass that into the .NET command, it'll execute MetaMorpheus. So it's the exact same thing. For Windows, you can use either one, but for Linux and Mac, you have to use the .NET command and then specify the DLL. So I'll cancel that. You can also use some other flags. So verbosity will reduce the amount of output. --test. So that'll run like a very quick search. It's a very small slice of a yeast file, and it's large enough where you can run calibration on it. But it's very, very small so that it'll finish in a couple of seconds. And I'll specify an output directory. Oops. We call this the micro vignette.
I'm a big fan of the vignettes because, again, back to people that think that everything breaks. It's if you have something you're like, no, this works, I promise.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a quick sanity check to make sure that, because it could be any number of things, right? It could be your MZML file is something weird with that. There could be your database is weird. Like MetaMorpheus is only one piece of the chain. So just to make sure MetaMorpheus is working, the micro vignette's a good way to test that. I'll do minimal verbosity, for example. It'll tell you when each task is finished. So this is a calibration GPTMD search, and now it's done. So yeah, that's the micro vignette. You can also do those, of course, on Mac and Linux.